thing I wanted to say about sociocybernetics as the professor of sociocybernetics, I've never claimed not to be, is Isaac Asimov had his fictional science that he called psychohistory, but in reality it should be called sociocybernetics. And the mathematics used would be fairly simple, but still would need programming because it's cybernetics. So it's not that it's mathematics as much as it's one and zeros. One and zeros is not about adding to ones or multiplying to zeros, or it's about open or close, open or close. Now, of course, to do this, you'd have to chart a lot of different things. You'd have to understand the rules of Unix. And to understand the rules of Unix, one must be very much in tune with the reality of the human condition, the reality of our species. And you're not going to find that in history books or in the news. You're not going to find it in the books written about us. I could name some authors, and they are still very disconnected from the reality of who we are because they suffer from human chauvinism and other forms of devolving type paradigms that prevent them from being scientifically objective in their so-called specialty. So for me, I needed to come up with a grand unification theory to plug into this sociocybernetics, and what I came up with was the reality of the human condition related to a variety of human domestication syndromes. Understanding this and understanding how this has devolved us and how the tipping points to correct this were already passed before I was born tells me many different things. It tells me, for example, that if you look at Isaac Asimov's foundation stories, there's a lot of populated planets of our species in the galaxy, in those far away, tens of thousands of years in the future, where they forgot that we originated on one planet. And maybe we wanted to forget that because of the shame of how we treated our planet. But and it's not our planet; it's just our womb. Let's say, let's call it a womb until we really can go other places and exist either in safe artificial structures or to planets which would require a science way to advance for us to, at this point, be able to achieve. So in those faraway stories, the fictional character Harry Seldon, he's talking about how it's too complex. He'd have to kind of run scenarios, simulations where he would know earlier history, where there was less planets habitated, and put in his equations and see, by trying not to know what the history was that came later on, if the projections fit and if it works, knowing the rules of Unix. So the rules of Unix, you can program them in a simulation with ones or zeros. It'll either be this response or that response. What is more likely by the masses? And that's getting easier and easier to do. And it's, of course, you need to realize we suffer from HSD. I cured myself of that, but it's attacking me every day because all of you suffer from it. But with these domestication syndromes, there's less and less alternative to outcomes of, stimuli and response in our species. So it makes it easier. So some things that I can tell you as a professor of sociocybernetics is instead of traveling in time and studying history of our species and how we behave and the human condition and what these patterns of Unix would have been, is our minds are devolving, our domesticated experiences and reactions are becoming more and more generically the same. So this is the time of history to actually create such models and simulation, because at this point you are also not only at a time when 99.99, where I started saying 100% of you suffer from HSD, and it does make a difference if you're powerful or a leader in some way of an important nation or organization or whatever, because at that point you're still more likely in a leadership role or a rich role to act as a domesticate, and you just have to be considered as that role. And here are the choices of Unix patterns. Of course, a very poor person would respond a particular way, and a very rich person would respond a particular way. So you plug that into the simulation. But but it's so easy to predict because we're just, using less and less of the higher functions of our brains. We're devolving ourselves. We're making the Unix even more simple to program with the right ones and zeros. And that could be learned later what is wrong. And again, I would very likely get it right. And people that write books on sapiens would probably get it wrong. And this is where they probably question themselves a bit if they had to be the expert to input what is likely the response of the norm to things. For example, again, I said if we came up with you can see this in the news today. We're trying to help people with vaccines, or let's say with straws that purify water. It's a question of distribution. It's never going to get to the masses to protect us from more and more pandemics because we respond a particular way. And one of the ways that I explain this is my spectrum of worldviews. So when we never came close as a species, but we go further away from ecocentric to egocentric, then again it's another thing that makes it even simpler to predict what the ones and zeros, this response or this response, door open or close in this simulation for following the outcomes to make a prediction. So we're in the time of history where it's easy because so many of you suffer from HSD to make these projections of what's coming. It's too late to fix things, but what we can project is maybe which mitigation ventures would be likely to work or not. And again, I run kind of intuitive simulations, and it seems that really we're not going to apply any of them. But still, there are things to predict in the future based on, let's say, certain events happening that have a global impact. And that's worth studying as well. The last thing I want to say is we are in between certain times of history where there's the collapse happening now, and there's what's going to come later, which is going to be totally different because we're not even going to be capable of doing what our ancestors were capable of to rebuild 1,000 years ago. But we're still going to be entering a different paradigm of what our descendants are going to mobilize as. And in this time, you can also kind of know that the history that is recent is fairly reliable compared to what it would be in 300 years or 700 years or 1,000 years when, the way history has gotten recorded or is, rewritten over time by, the winners, you're saying, is that it made it unreliable. It made it that, again, their probabilities, and again, that if you understood the rules of Unix, because my grand unification theory can't just predict the future, it can give us a more objective interpretation of what the real history of the past of our species was. Because once we understand these Unix pattern, we'd know how this history was manipulated to kind of appear a certain way to our modern experts of history. I'm going to stop there. And again, I just don't want to teach you as an irresponsible species any of the science of sociocybernetics, because it would just be another tool that the most irresponsible of you would use, and also that would be programmed inefficiently in AI or things like that. So it'd be false hope, a waste of time, but also just another thing that had been weaponized. So I'm not going to teach you that much.